right. I hope my voice will hold up during
Okay.
this time.
Good morning.
So, good
Today
morning.
is December 7th, 2006. We're at the home of Mr. THAD Reed in Fort Collins, Colorado. My name is Brad Hoops. I'm the interviewer for the Northern Colorado Veterans Oral History Project. Welcome, Mr. Reed.
Thank you.
And I want to start out by thanking you for participating in this project.
Well, thank you. I think it's quite a privilege. My family's been after me for years for this, so finally we're getting around to it.
Very good.
65 years later than when World War II started.
Oh yes, today is December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day.
Right, yeah.
Well, let's start out if we could, Mr. Reed.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, when and where you were born?
Yeah, I was born in kind of a desolate area up there. I was born at Beach, North Dakota. That's right on the Montana line, and my dad was a rancher and farmer in Montana, just over the line in Montana. And he came out from beautiful southern Minnesota, he and three of his brothers, to homestead in those days. And they had property right next to Teddy Roosevelt's ranch, so they were well acquainted with Teddy Roosevelt.
Huh.
And that was quite an honor and privilege as the years went by. And that's where I was raised until I went to a one-room school through the 8th grade. And at that time, then we moved over here to Grand Junction, Colorado. And we were here just 2 years. We moved here and over to Grand Junction in 1932. And I lost my daddy with double pneumonia in 1935. So I had my mother and three of us boys, my little sister, that were growing up in those days. And after I graduated from high school, I went up to Western State College at Gunnison, Colorado. Not many people knew about that college back in those days. And then that's when the government decided they wanted to put every young man into the service for 1 year.
Can I interrupt you
Yes.
real quick, Mr. Reed? You'd mentioned earlier that you wanted to talk a little bit about your grandfathers.
Yes, I do.
And then we'll continue on with your story.
Okay, so then at this time I'd like to tell about my two grandfathers because I think they were pretty special. My grandpa, Elijah Coleman Reed, was really special because he was in the Civil War. He went in the Civil War when he was 16 years old. And the greatest thing that he accomplished was he was a flag carrier for General Sherman from Georgia to the sea, you know, when they made the grand march from Atlanta to the sea. And then he came back to Minnesota and established his family. And he was a he and Grandma were real special people. Then on my mother's side, we had an unusual situation. Grandpa Fiddler actually settled with all the German people down around southeastern Ohio at actually at Ferry Crossing, they call that city or town. And that's where many of the Quakers started. That's where the Quakers were a famous group, very similar to the Amish today, and good, clean people, good Christian people. Most of them were German. Often they were referred to as Pennsylvania Dutch. But the Quakers are the ones that started the Quaker oats that we have for breakfast every morning. They actually developed the Quaker oats, and then later the Quaker oil come out, and they wanted to change the name of Pennsylvania to the Quaker State, because the Quakers wanted to really be fully recognized. They were special people. And then later, Grandpa moved out. He wanted to go way west, so he went to Des Moines, Iowa. And was in he was a streetcar motorman there for many years and raised his family in West Des Moines, Iowa. And then he got away from the Quaker religion, and that was kind of the end of that story. But the Quakers were great people. They started many things, hard-working, clean people.
Did your grandfather that served in the Civil War, did you know him? Did he?
Oh yes, I knew him.
Did he tell stories of?
Yeah, very little, because he was 16 years old when he went in, and he just said everything was so brutal, you know. And I remember when we were little kids, he used to tell us about what they went through and what life was like in the Civil War.
Oh, wow.
And it was really hard and difficult. And the miles that they walked, you know, most of the transportation in the Civil War was consisted of men walking from one state to another, or riding a horse if horses were available. Horses were precious animals in those days.
Okay, well, that was very interesting. Shall we get back to
Yes.
your story?
Yeah.
I think we left off, you'd gotten out of high school in 1937, I believe?
Yes.
If you want to continue from there.
Okay, and then I went into the Navy on 8/8, that's August 8th, 1938.
Were you, did you enlist or were you drafted?
Yeah, I enlisted. In those days, if you went in the Navy on 4-year enlistment or 6-year enlistment, you could get any school you wanted, and I wanted the hospital school so bad. I wanted to stay with medicine, and they assured me that after I got through boot camp in San Diego, I would go to hospital corps school at the Naval Hospital in San Diego, and that's exactly what happened. So I was about the happiest man in the Navy during those years, and promotion was good, and they wanted to educate you well. When I went to hospital corps school at the Naval Hospital, Mr. Weatherall, our chief warrant officer, was our commanding officer, and he told us at that time, he said, most of you are in here on a 6-year enlistment, and you most likely will end up being career men, and if you're in the Navy for 10 years or more, he said, it will be difficult to go to any ship or station and not know someone. And that was very true all my life. And one school that I was pretty proud of, they like to give you lots of education. In 1939, I had a wonderful a tour. This was ports of call, they call it. They had the aircraft carrier, the Lexington, and they had 2 battleships, the Pennsylvania and the Tennessee, and they had to be taken from the west coast to the east coast for repair. That was in 1939. And we left San Diego and went down through the canal and went to Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, and spent a week. And people made you so welcome. When the fleet came in those days, everybody was so cordial and liked you. And the group that I was with, we were invited out to the Lions Club in Rio de Janeiro, and the president of that Lions Club was from the USA, and he was a distributor for the Best Foods Company, and he just gave us a tour that was out of this world, the group that I was with. And of course, with that many men, you know, things are well planned, and all organizations, churches and such participate when the fleet comes in. And then from there we went up to Brooklyn, New York, and there I had spent 6 months in a medical supply depot at the corner of Pearl and Sand Street in Brooklyn, and had many tours of different pharmaceutical facilities in New Jersey to see how medicines are made and how they were compounded and dispensed in those days, and how the Navy procured them. That was our big learning point. And then from there I went back to San Diego, at the Naval Hospital. And then they sent me to cardiology school. I wanted that so bad. So then they sent me back to the National Naval Medical Center at Bethesda, Maryland. And that was a one-year course. And that later turned out to be the V8 program, where so many, it was a medical school. And they were putting doctors and nurses and technicians through there in mass numbers in after the war started. It was hard studying and hard work, but it was worth it all. And then back to the Naval Hospital at San Diego after that. And I worked in cardiology most of my life in the Navy. Enjoyed every bit of it. Worked with such wonderful doctors and people. And it was there that I met my future wife, Ethel Mayberry. She came in with a group from Kansas. She came in November 16th of '41, and the war broke out the 7th of December. And then...
Can I ask you,
yes.
Do you remember the day of Pearl Harbor and what you were thinking?
Oh my, do I remember that day. The day of Pearl Harbor, I had duty that day in cardiology, and at the Naval Hospital at San Diego, the golf course was just out in front of the building, and the San Diego Chargers were just getting started. They didn't even have a field of their own. They played at the San Diego High School and used their bleachers. And of course there was really a crowd there that day. Every bleacher seat was taken. And then at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the shore patrol come in with the big bull horns. They were just like fog horns. You know, you could hear them all over the county of San Diego. And they said, all military personnel report back to your ships and stations immediately. The Japanese have bombed Pearl Harbor. And of course that was a horrible message to hear, and things were so confusing at that time. Nobody had any idea what was going to happen. In a few days they had huge balloons up over the city, tied down so that the Japanese planes couldn't get in and bomb the city.
Because there was a fear that they were going to bomb and invade the West Coast. Yeah,
that's right. There was a big fear there. Yeah, we'll hear that story from a lot of different veterans of that day. And of course that never did happen. And then I was at the Naval Hospital there in San Diego until May the 5th, 1942. That was 5 months later. And then they took, Roosevelt did such a great thing when he initiated the Lend-Lease program. They took 240 of us, doctors, nurses, technicians, all of us were sort of specialists, a nucleus, sent us down to Auckland, New Zealand, to start a new hospital down there because we had so many casualties from Guadalcanal. It was just terrible, and they could not get them home, you know. We didn't have the type of airplanes in those days that we have today. Everything had to go by ship. And all 240 of us were put aboard the Queen Mary. England had given us the Queen Elizabeth and the Queen Mary for transports in the Pacific. And this was a first run for the Queen Mary. We had 7,000 people on that ship.
wow.
Only 240 of us were Navy. The rest were Army, and there was some Marines. All of them were going to Australia, but we were going to Auckland, New Zealand to get this new hospital started. And that was such a great experience in New Zealand. You know, there were such great people there, and I immediately got acquainted with a family that they had a son that was sent to North Africa, and he was there 3 days with when Rommel was going down through the African desert, you know. And he was killed the third day he was there. So they just sort of took me on as their son. And that year for Christmas, Mrs. Sutherland, both of their parents had come from Scotland originally. And she had a leg of lamb, two legs of lamb in a big roaster with dressing just level with the top. I'll never forget that great dinner. And she wanted me to invite some other boys. There was 4 of us ate dinner with them that day. A leg of lamb, that was such a treat because she knew exactly how to do it. And the New Zealanders furnished everything on the Lend-Lease plan. We used the facility, and when we left there, then my wife and I were back there several times later, and that was turned into, they call it a college, really high school.
Was your wife, your future wife, was she part of the nucleus that went down
No,
with you?
you know, she wasn't. She went with another group to Espiritu Santos in July of that year, and as they were going in to Espiritu, that's right over near New Britain, you know, just north of Darwin, Australia, and their ship was strafed by 2 Japanese planes. Something like 14 people were killed on that ship. And none of the nurses were killed. There's 42 nurses on that ship going to, they called it Base 3. And these were just Quonset huts out in the boondocks, you know, where they could take care of casualties. Then the hospital ships would come in and get the casualties and take them to other hospitals. We had a mobile hospital we had 2 at Auckland, New Zealand, and 1 at Brisbane, and 1 at Sydney. So then, after 7 months of that wonderful duty in New Zealand, I was so inspired by the beautiful golf courses. I wanted to learn to play golf. I was kind of getting started. And then, because I was a cardiology technician, they wanted me to teach at the University of New Zealand there in Auckland, and so I taught in spare time. You know, so many other people were taken out for the war, and so anybody who would teach, they were just thrilled to death to have. And so I missed out on my golf playing during that time. But it was so neat working with the New Zealanders. They have a system, you know, we think we're so ahead of time on everything. I just wanted to read something here. I wanted to, before we would start class each time, they had this little ritual they went through called a doctor's prayer. And it says, "As I care for my patients today, be there with me, O Lord, I pray. Let me speak kind words that mean so much, and in my hands place your healing touch. Let your love shine through all that I do, so those in need may hear and feel you." And they had to know that by heart, and before you'd start class, everybody would quote that. I thought that was so unique, you know, because you don't see much of that. We think we're way ahead, but we're not always up above what other people are doing. So many wonderful people down in New Zealand. So then, after 7 months on there in January of 1943, a hospital ship came in with a load of patients, and they'd had their orders drastically changed, and they needed 4 doctors and 12 nurses and 12 technicians, and I happened to be one of those technicians. So we went aboard that hospital ship, the USS Benevolence. We went around the south side of Australia around to Perth. We did not have a hospital over at Perth, Australia, over on the Indian Ocean side. And Perth is another wonderful, wonderful city and great people. So our mission over there was taking care of submarine personnel. We had our own submarines and our allies were functioning out of Perth, Australia, up through the islands, working, trying to get back to the Philippines. And that was a real experience there. It was one of those groups, one submarine in that group that got MacArthur out of the Philippines and got him down to Australia, you know, after the Japanese came in.
Right.
So then, most of 43, we were at Perth, Australia. And then we started working up through the islands. And, you know, from Perth, Australia, clear to the Philippines, it's just islands. You know, you're rarely out of sight of islands. And a lot of those islands have never, at that time, they'd never been navigated by large ships, you know. And so it was really rough getting up through there. A lot of areas we had to go by sounding. And of course a hospital ship usually stays back about 12 miles from the man-of-war ships, battleships and cruisers when you're in combat. And so that's the area up through the Spice Islands, up through Palau and Ponape, all of those islands. The Japanese had been in there so long, and they had one of the greatest, most powerful radio stations that existed on the globe at that time. And an interesting thing was, Grandpa Bush was at that time one of our youngest Navy pilots, and he was assigned to bomb that radio station, dive bomb. He was flying in dive bombers at that time. And he got shot down, and he survived. One of our submarines picked him up. And he was hot to get back in another plane. He was determined to get that station, and that's what he did. He got it on the second run. And that is the station that you've heard of, Tokyo Rose. Tokyo Rose was a great, great girl, a Japanese girl born and raised in San Francisco, and she worked in the radio station in San Francisco, spoke excellent English, and very intelligent girl. And she always wanted to go to Japan and visit kinfolk and see Japan. And she had picked that time to go to Japan, and she was caught when they bombed Pearl Harbor. And so the Japanese, of course, they were really happy to have her. And they used her for morale-breaking purposes. She broadcast over that station.
Did you remember listening to her broadcast?
Oh, many, many times. She would name our ship. She would name plane squadrons and such, and that they would be bombed at a certain time. See, this just knocks the daylights out of morale, you know. It's really hard on morale to have somebody talking to you on the radio telling you that a certain hour or something's going to happen. And that didn't always happen by quite a ways, but she could sure break the morale. And they didn't do anything to Tokyo Rose afterwards because she really was a great person, you know. She was loved and appreciated in San Francisco so much, but she got caught short in Japan when she went to visit just before the war broke out. So she was a victim of circumstances, and a wonderful speaker. So on the way in into the Philippines, that was two exciting things. When Bush bombed that powerful radio station, and of course the Japanese had been throughout the islands there for so many years, and they were so well established and so well camouflaged. You just think that each island was a beautiful place. And you know, the coral reefs there are so magnificent, and that's such a beautiful part of the Pacific. You just never forget the beauty of that part of the Pacific. But the coral reefs go for miles and miles and you can't get across them because they're too shallow. And when we were at Palau, we lost so many men. You know, we lost over 7,000 Marines just going up through the Spice Islands, Palau and Yap.
So your ship would follow, say, the invasion forces,
Yeah,
and then sit back, and they'd bring out the
Right.
wounded out to you.
They'd bring the wounded to us.
Were you ever harassed by the Japanese, either the submarines or the planes, or did they stick to the basically the rules of war and leave you alone?
All during the war, the Japanese sunk one hospital ship, and the Germans sank one hospital ship. No other hospital ships were ever. They had to be painted white according to the Geneva Conference. We had to have lights on 24 hours a day. The crosses had to show, and you had to be well identified. And see, one other thing I wanted to tell right there, it was so important. And that skipped my mind right then. In the Palau area, so many of the islands, run like from Palau. That group of islands run for 200 miles south toward Australia, and you can't get on. You can't just go across to any place because there's too much coral, too shallow. And all of these places, the Japanese were embedded. You wouldn't believe how well embedded they were in these places. They just, you couldn't get to them. The battleships would lay back 14 miles and fire in. The first Kamikaze that we saw we were almost right on the equator. And a 17-year-old boy came in a Kamikaze, and each Kamikaze, they were such little cheap planes, most of them were flown by high school kids. And each one of them had a bomb, a fair-sized bomb on them, enough to do some damage. And he came into the California, the battleship California. That's the one that Chester Nimitz was heading. He was heading our battle group up through the Spice Islands. And this kid got in through all of that fire and hit right in the conning tower, right where all the navigation takes place. Didn't put the ship out of commission, but it killed 48 men, and 8 of those were hospital corpsmen that were on their battle stations when we were hit. And so when you're on a hospital ship, you can get transferred just quicker and lightly.
Yeah.
I was one of the 8 that was transferred, so I was on the California then for a number of weeks. We had to take it into, on the Lend-Lease deal again, into Singapore.
Were you on that ship that day the Kamikaze hit?
No,
okay.
I was transferred because they lost 48 men. 8 of those were hospital corpsmen, so they took 8 of us off the hospital ship to put us on there temporarily till they could get permanent people out. I went into Singapore, and those people were so great. Those Singapore people, I always say, they went over that ship like a bunch of ants. They in 3 weeks they had that ship back out and ready for combat again. It's just unbelievable how hard they worked, 24 hours a day. And there's a lot of good people every place you go. So then after that was complete, I went back to the hospital ship. And then, we worked on up to the Philippines, and then eventually got into Okinawa. And that was a sad, sad day too. 2 days before the war was over, before Okinawa was taken, is what I mean, General Buckner was killed, And Ernie Pyle, our great, great reporter that was both in Europe and the Pacific, was killed. Just 2 days before Okinawa was secured. And that was awfully sad. So at Okinawa, you know, there's two huge bays, one on the China seaside, they named that Buckner Bay after General Buckner, and then Naha Bay was the city, the town, Naha Bay. And then, John, this was peculiar. The Kamikazes were so thick at that time. They'd come in at night, and about all they had to do is come down, and they would hit a ship, you know, because it just seemed like all the ships in the country were at Okinawa at that time. Both bays were filled with ships. And we were anchored right near the Pennsylvania, and Johnny Carson, a young ensign, who we all learned to know later, was on the Pennsylvania, and that a Kamikaze came down and hit that on the bow, and killed quite a number of people. We had, I think we took on 38 people from that, and Johnny Carson was one of them.
Huh.
And of course, he was just another ensign, you know.
Yeah.
Had no idea he would be one of our big radio, television comedians later in life. But there was so many interesting things that took place that we learned about later, you know. At the time, it was just everybody for his own health. And I saw my first helicopter in Okinawa. The helicopter is such a great piece of equipment, and they were using them, you know, on ships. You had the signalman did all the work between the ship and the control on the beach, you know, taking orders and so on. And with the new helicopters, and they looked like flies, you know. They just had that big bulb and a beater. They called them egg beaters, and they could come right out over a ship and drop the orders almost in the captain's hands, you know, for each ship, telling them what they would do next, you know. So then we were, of course, in Okinawa. Then until, you know, everything was getting ready. It just seemed like all the supplies on Earth were coming into Okinawa, getting ready for the big push on Japan. And we had no hopes whatsoever of ever getting back, really, because that was going to be a bloody deal. And at that time, while that was pending, before Truman authorized the dropping of the two bombs, I had a letter from what turned out to be my wife later. She had returned back to the Naval Hospital at San Diego, and because I went, she went to the Baptist church there where I went, and they had 24-hour service center for the military, donuts and coffee and games and so on. So they wanted to have a mother and daughter banquet, and they asked my dear mother, who was out there, widow lady, trying to do something for the war effort, if she would be a mother, and she said she would be glad to. And she had 6 people at her table, and one of them was Ethel May, a Navy nurse that sat right by her, and she said, if you were up at the Naval Hospital at that time, you may have known my son. Well, there was hundreds of people going through.
Yeah.
So Ethel said, what was his name? And she said, you know, I knew him quite well. We just lost complete track of him. Where is he now? She gave me, she gave her my address, and she sent me a note and the hospital paper. The hospital paper was called The Dry Dock. And then under in script writing it had, every sailor like a ship needs a haven of rest. And there was an update. I hadn't seen that for going on 3 years, you know, so that was pretty precious. So I got a letter back, you know. It took about 2 weeks to get a letter back and forth. And so that got us together. It wouldn't have been for my mother being there at the time. Probably we never crossed tracks again, you know. Well, anyway, that's just a neat thing along the way. So then, when after the two bombs were dropped, you know, actually Japan conceded on the 15th day of August 1945.
Can I interrupt you, Mr.
Yes.
Reed, and ask you, do you remember hearing about that, where you were and what you were thinking when you heard the bombs had been dropped? And
Yeah.
did you have any idea even what an atomic bomb was?
No, I had no idea. People said, what is an atomic bomb? You know, what is it? How could it be? None of us knew anything about an atomic bomb. That probably was one of the best secrets that ever was kept. You know, it was the atomic bomb.
Was it hard to imagine a bomb that could kill that many people that were that devastating?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Nobody could believe it. They just couldn't believe it.
And can I ask you too,
Yes.
what your opinion was? I know since then there's been controversy whether we should have dropped it or not.
Yes.
Any thoughts
Yeah.
on your perspective on that?
Well, I had lots of experience in that field later than after the war was over, and I'm convinced that it was the only thing to do.
Yeah.
It took a lot of lives at that time, but it saved far more lives than that in the military and in Japan. And the Japanese, many of them told us later, they got down on their knees and kissed the ground, thankful that the war was over.
Uh-huh.
They were so glad to have it over. And I had friends in Auckland, New Zealand, that these good friends of Sutherland's that raised Welsh corgi dogs. You know what? They're beautiful dogs, and every ship was having a mascot. You know, so I went to my commanding officer, and on a hospital ship, you have two commanding officers, one for the ship and then a medical commanding officer for the hospital. And he said if I would assure him that dog would be taken care of, we could have one. So I got one. Of course, we named him Skipper, and he had the best house on earth. And he was all through the war, all the way to Tokyo. And they also had penguins, and the small type. And I wanted a penguin. I've always been a penguin hound, and so they gave me a penguin. And we had that penguin aboard. We called him Billy. And Billy had the life of Riley. He went all the way from New Zealand clear to Tokyo Bay. He was there for the signature when MacArthur and Tojo and the people signed the end of the war, you know. And of course we had to have food aboard for our ships. And the man who was with we would call it the Department of Agriculture over there, to make sure that any of the food that we got did not come from human soil, you know.
Yeah.
They used that.
Right.
And he'd been to San Francisco twice, and he spoke pretty good English. And he was a tall Japanese. You don't see too many tall Japanese. Really a neat guy. And he wanted us, his last name was Ito, E-I-T-O. And he wanted us to call him Sam because he liked that name. You know, he liked that American name, Sam. So we called him Sam. We got pretty well acquainted with him. I said, Sam, you could really help me out. You know, I have this penguin, and I just don't know what's going to happen to us after we leave here, because we were going to have to haul prisoners out and so on.
But at this point, you were part of the occupation force of Japan?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, right, almost immediately.
Uh-huh.
So he said, you're talking to the right guy. Scoochie, you know, he was using some of his Japanese lingo too. He said, my wife works at the zoo. He said, I'll take it to her. So he took that penguin to his wife. And that penguin didn't have to go through quarantine or anything. He just went right with the others and zoo at Tokyo. And MacArthur had things so well planned. You know, he took from the 15th of August till the 2nd of September to get everything just right. no, he dealt with the Orientals for many, many years out there, so he knew how to handle things. And he wanted open ship on every ship that was in there. And of course, every ship was, Missouri was right out in the middle of the bay. You know, that's such a big swirly bay there. Everything headed east in case we had to get out of there. People said, well, why did you need a hospital ship? We said, we had 4 hospital ships there. We didn't know what might happen the last thing, you know.
Right.
You got to take care of your men. And, but, so you want open house. And the teachers, I never forget, you know, they have a discipline that we just don't know. We've just never had a discipline that's as effective as the Japanese have. And they had all those little school kids lined up just like Cupid dolls. And when they came up the gangway, they all just step by step behind the other. And we were supposed to have lots of goodies for them. And they weren't near as interested in those goodies as they were. They wanted to see us bad guys, what we looked like, you know. And this was so interesting because years later, in San Diego, we ran into a couple at church that he was on one of the ships. He was one of those students that came aboard at the day that the signature took place between the USA and Japan. And we got to see Tojo. Tojo was big on his white stallion, you know, they have beautiful white horses over there. And he had from the Emperor's quarters, he rode his horse down to the dock, you know, and came aboard. And then, of course, after the signature was over, why, he and MacArthur got in the big Cadillac with the U.S. flag flying on the front right fender, and they took off together. And see, then I believe it was the something like the third day after the signature, Tojo tried to commit suicide, and one of our own American doctors prevented, just happened to be at the right place at the right time and prevented it. And so that was pretty special.
Now, were you able to get shore leave? Were you able to go ashore into Japan, or just?
Not then. No, nobody. Not then, because the occupational forces were all designed to come in later. You see, because we had a mission. They had all those prisoners. Boy, just think that was on the 2nd of September. The signature took place. I never got home till November the 6th. And we had to go down to southern Japan, down on the south west end of Japan to gather signature, to gather prisoners. And we had prisoners there, civilians, military, and see, so many of my dear friends from Guam, everybody from Guam, and doctors, nurses, and all of them were taken prisoner, you know.
Oh, jeez.
Just immediately.
Did they talk about? Did they talk to you about what it was like during the war? Their conditions.
Later, individually, they really didn't want to talk. Most of them that we dealt with had been in the mines and in the shipyards, and they took pretty good care of them. The ones in the shipyard, they actually were taken pretty good care of compared to what some of them had to go through.
Right.
So then we had 4 hospital ships going to southern Japan, just above Sasebo. They seemed to funnel them down that way for some reason. And just to show you how enthusiastic people were to know that war was over. See, a lot of them, when they got aboard, they wondered if the war really was over. And we had 721 beds on our hospital ship. And when we left port on that first run, We had 1,300 people on that ship.
Oh, wow.
Just really something. Just to take over to Okinawa to be distributed, to go home on different ships, and a few got to go on planes. Planes just weren't, we didn't have planes yet, passenger planes like
Right.
we do today. It's just, it's amazing how things have improved since that time.
Yeah, sure.
We were so many miles behind. We had lots of wonderful military planes, and the P-38 was out. We have one of our drivers right here that his daddy was an ace. He flew the P-38s and got 5 zeros in one day. Isn't that something? So then, after we got the prisoners evacuated, and that took lots of time and lots of work, but all of them were so grateful and so happy. Anything was all right with any of them. We didn't have any grouches, I can tell you that. They were just so pleased to be free again and know that they were headed home. And of course, Chester Nimitz had authorized, about halfway up to Okinawa. By the time we got to the Philippines, he felt that everybody should be in the same kind of uniform, with no rank, no anything on, because we had so many prisoners taken, And he thought it'd be easier on those prisoners. Because if an officer was taken, he was pretty well brutalized, and if it was an enlisted man with more rank, they would really, they took a lot of punishment, If you were a private, you probably got by fairly well. So all of us went into marine green, and that was so comfortable and so good, and wash and wear, and everybody liked it real good. And Chester Nimitz, Admiral Chester Nimitz, was such a great admiral. After Okinawa, he was shifted over to Guam, and he cleaned up Guam, and of course he was in on all the end of the island wars. And of course they named many things, and streets and boulevards and such in Hawaii. Nimitz Boulevard still on afterwards, because he was so well thought of. So I got home then on November the 6th, on my loving sister's birthday, and they had...
Go back to San Diego, or did you come back to Colorado?
We actually came into Seattle, Pier 99 in Seattle, and then we had, none of us had clothes. They sent my group to Frederick and Nelson in Seattle for outfitting with clothes. They just took care of all of it. The Navy just paid all that bill, all you had to do is report and get measured up and get a new uniform. And the man at Frederick and Nelson in the uniform department was such a great guy. I'd never forget him. He took such great care of us, and got our uniforms as fast as he could. And he had lost a son on a ship in the Philippines, so he had a lot of heart for all of us,
Yeah.
And then they put us on a train, and they kicked, it went like regular Navy. They just put you out on 60 days terminal leave, because we had no leave, in all of World War II. And so then I got to come home, and it was with all my relatives and friends in Colorado.
What was that like after being away for so long?
It was really great to see everybody again. so many things had changed. My. And my mother had, she was a widow woman so many years. She was a matron at Chapita Hall, one of the girls' dormitories at Western State College for many years. And she was able to get a 1939 Mercury four-door sedan for me that some people had left, 1939. And it had 6,000 miles on it.
Huh.
A railroad executive from South Carolina had driven it out to Colorado, and then the war broke out, so he just left it in the Ford garage there. They just put it up on blocks, and there it was. And I had plenty of money saved up with my mother, and so she just bought that car, and then they thought that I would come in. You know, we didn't have all this communication then like we do now. They thought I would come into Fresno, California, because that we have so many relatives out there. And I came straight home, of course, by rail. And my mother and my sister and her little baby were out in Fresno waiting for me. So we finally got a call through to them, and they came back with my new 1939 Mercury. And I called that Mercury Mary and the Mercury. I had that Mary and the Mercury when I got married. And my first shore duty after I got back was at the Naval Hospital at Long Beach, California. And I thought, how much better could a person ever be treated than that? Because that hospital was just commissioned 4 days before World War II broke out. And of course I had my usual job there as a technician, and my wife was on duty at the Naval Hospital at San Diego. That was 92 miles away, and I kept that freeway pretty hot. Every time I had a chance to get to San Diego, I went to San Diego. So that was in January of 46. And then we were married, and she had to leave the Navy, and a Navy nurse could not be married at that time. So she resigned in April, and we were married in September 22nd, 1946. And had duty at Naval Hospital Long Beach. 13 months after we were born, why, our little red-headed, brown-eyed daughter came along, Melba May. And then from there, I took a special, they sent me back to the Naval Hospital at Portsmouth, Virginia.
Now, at this point, you had decided to make a career out of the Navy, or?
Oh, yes, yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I checked around the Los Angeles area while I was on this terminal leave, and I couldn't find anything that had any better future, you know.
Yeah.
And I was the chief petty officer, and I figured I liked my work so well, and my wife liked the Navy so well, and we just decided we'd just stay in. So we stayed in for 24 years. We had a neat experience. This was a special mission. They sent two of us back to the Naval Hospital at Portsmouth, Virginia, and this was a program under the United Nations.
Oh, wow.
And it was headed by Captain Lawrence E. Bach, who I knew so well, a red-headed, blue-eyed captain, medical officer from Knoxville, from Knox in Kentucky, near Lexington. Why would that slip my mind? We'll just call it Lexington, Kentucky.
Okay.
He was just a great guy. And so our mission then was to go to Guam and establish medical units on these various islands that we, the United Nations felt they had an obligation to replant coconut trees and damage that had been done by our military moving in. So our job was setting up the medical units, and this was so neat because everything was so well planned, and we had to fly around in the Martin Mars, the seaplanes, you know, to these various islands on Yap and Palau. That's the reason I can tell you how beautiful all that country is, flying over it. And while we were there, our son was born. Ray Coleman was born out there. So we've always called him our Guamanian son, Ray Coleman Reed.
So your family was traveling with you at this point?
Yeah,
Okay.
I had my family out there. And Guam is a nice place to be. I tell you, we just enjoyed every second we were there. We were there approximately 21 months. And it was just a nice special assignment that I never dreamed I'd get in on, you know. I was taken away from my medical, my technical specialty during that time, but after that time, then of course the Korean War broke out just 5 years after we thought, you know, after World War II, I prayed that none of my family would ever have to go through anything like World War II. And then 5 years later, here we are back in, back at war again, and right back to a hospital ship. I was on the USS Repose this time, and the Repose has a wonderful, wonderful record war-wise, because it's been through so much. Yeah, that's a picture of it there. I also got a picture of the, this is the Repose right here. The Korean War, you know, was a different situation. We lost so many people. I'd like to just speak on that a minute if we have a minute.
Oh, sure.
According to the U.S. Department of Defense statistics, roughly 36,000 American soldiers died in the conflict. 54,000, if those were of those that died of war-related injuries outside Korea or are counted. In addition, more than 600,000 North and South Korean soldiers and 390,000 Chinese soldiers died in the 3-year war. An estimated 1 million Korean civilians also were killed. Then, luckily for South Korea, thousands of U.S. Troops were stationed in nearby Japan, where they had been since the end of World War II. The United States never declared war through Congress. Rather, to save time, President Harry Truman sought to stop North Korean aggression via the United Nations. Because of this, the Korean War is often termed a police action. And of course, I was on the USS Repose, a hospital ship up in Incheon Harbor. That was on the China seaside of Korea. We had 3 hospitals: the Haven, the Constellation, and the Repose. And then the Danish people had a hospital ship there. And this was the difference in, so in the meantime, all of our hospital ships had helicopter landing platforms established. And that was so special, because we had, right there at Incheon, we had a Marine Corps casualty squadron, helicopter squadron, that could bring the casualties in from the field units up on the 30th parallel In 40 minutes time, they could have them into a hospital ship. In a hospital ship, I've got a special deal. The Bureau of Medicine Surgery sent me there of our ship. You have all these specialists aboard that are such great doctors and nurses and technicians that they can just do things that really you can't do any better at a hospital.
Did you see a vast difference in medical care from World War II to Korean War?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Oh yes. Oh, so much so. Yes. In this one, I have a wonderful book here. Just that book. And this nurse here is special to me. She.
Can you tell us the title for the viewing audience?
Okay. The title of this is Quiet Heroes. Navy Nurses of the Korean War, 1950 to 1953. Far East Command. Frances Amore, Commander, U.S. Navy. And this good Navy nurse, she was so special. She spent 7 years compiling this book, dealing with all the different departments in the Bureau of Medicine Surgery in Washington. And she has every port that we went to, how many patients. The chronology of this book is just unbelievable. So I'm pretty proud of this. And she was such a special girl. And our medical supply officer, and that it takes a special person to be a medical supply officer on a hospital ship, because you use so many tons of stuff so fast. And we had this lieutenant commander in the Medical Service Corps. He'd lost his wife with breast cancer when she was 28 years old. And I got those two together. I just thought that both of them need one another. They're so similar and so on. And I think they're probably the happiest couple in the USA today. I've tried to keep up with them through the years. But I appreciate so much the effort that she went to putting out this book. There's so many people do so many great things, so much dedication. There's one story as we were leaving the South Pacific. You know, things were closing in, some down in the European theater. And any time that you have people, you know, we think about entertainment, and somebody is always full of it. And they, at the South Pacific headquarters, where Bull Halsey functioned from, he directed the battleship divisions up through the Pacific. And they had this large 8-foot by 8-foot screen. And they kept a daily account of where the Germans were and the Russians, English, and so on, going into Berlin. And they had a large picture of Hitler all dressed up real neat like he always did in his military uniform. And at that time, a very popular song across the nation was "Don't Fence Me In." And so here's Hitler standing over Berlin in his nice uniform, and all these different countries with their troops coming into Berlin. And it said Hitler's theme song, "Don't Fence Me In." And that worked out just pretty well. That's just an extra on the side, no extra charge for that.
Okay.
So then, let's see, what else could we do? We really pretty well finished off World War II, haven't we? We got to Korea, and after Korea, the Navy was really good to me. They gave me duty at Tripler Army Medical Center in Honolulu. And you've got to feel sorry for people that have to go to places like that for duty. But Tripler Army Medical Center, you know, was just completed and finished in 1947. And they wanted to have a hospital as good as, or one that would match up with the Naval Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland. And they just about accomplished that. So I worked in cardiology there. Because it was under Army command, but the Air Force and the Navy had to furnish their personnel. And so I had got back to my technical specialty there, and enjoyed it so much. We were there 3 years and 4 months. Enjoyed every second of it. My family enjoyed it. My son and daughter had some of the best teachers on earth, the Japanese teachers, the Chinese teachers. And the Oriental teachers have, again, a discipline in the classroom that we don't have. You hate to admit that, but they really know how to handle the kiddos. And my kids have said so many times, because they went to school under those conditions, they didn't go through this hatred business like a lot of kids have to go through, and so on.
Did you have any, going through the war, any animosity towards the Japanese?
Well, I really didn't, because there's so many good Japanese, and I had lots of good Japanese friends.
Yeah.
And see, when a good example of that is when Truman took General MacArthur away from Japan, he sent Mark Clark over there. You probably remember the Mark Clark, General Mark Clark. He was a great general. When he left there, he went to that special college in South Carolina, is it North Carolina, where it's just all boys. I can't say the name of that right now. But anyway, Mark Clark, was in Italy. And he had a group of Japanese soldiers sent over there, American soldiers. It was a special Japanese group.
Right.
And when they were in the mountains there in Italy, he told about how eloquently they functioned and how dedicated they were fighting against their own people. And he said, if you have any more of this quality of people, don't hesitate to send them. And I thought, how high a recommendation could you get? When I went to college, I had several Japanese friends. George Mariyama was such a great guy from over at La Junta, Colorado, and he was killed in Italy. And I think Tokyo Rose is a good example. Tokyo Rose was so well thought of in San Francisco, and such a great, well-educated girl, and such a great radio announcer. And then she went to Japan to see her folks.
Right.
And that's where she got caught up with when the war broke out. So she was really there under pressure.
So then from your duty in Hawaii, you moved...
Yeah, then we went from there, went to the Naval Hospital at the Marine Corps Supply Center at Barstow, California, right in the middle of the Mojave Desert.
Yeah.
And that's where I was when I retired.
Yeah.
And I had a friend we were on a hospital ship together. He was also a cardiology technician. And he said he was a year ahead of me. He retired a year before I did. And he came to Denver, and they were just getting the heart catheterization laboratories started, and that was right down our line, and the intensive care units were being started across the country. So he used to write to me. We did not have email, but he'd write to me often, and he said, I want you to keep your mind on Denver. He said, when you retire, he said, don't take a look at anything, just go straight down the road, just head straight for Denver because we need you.
Huh.
And so we did just that. And I went to work at the VA Medical Center in Denver and spent 22 years there.
Is that right?
So I was one of those double dippers that old President Johnson did not like. He was going to do away with that, and it didn't work out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you think? Let me ask you how you. How do you think your war experience affected your life or changed your life? Any thoughts along that way?
Oh, I think it helped me to understand people, especially because I worked with so many wonderful people, and people of all shapes and races, you know. And I just had so many great experiences with, then I had duty back in Japan again, and I had lots of Japanese friends, you know. They're some of the most dedicated friends that you can have. It's just, they'll do anything for you, and everything is top speed, you know. They trot every place they go. They don't spend much time walking, they'd rather trot, but you've got to be fast to catch those trains in Japan. Yeah. And that's been true most any place we've ever been. We enjoy all nationalities and such, you know. We always think it's kind of like the black man and the Indian, where the black man was telling the Indian, he said, just tell me one thing that you've done. I said, the black people are, you know, they're aces at athletics and so many things. And he said, the Indian just stand back and don't do anything. And the Indian just ended up and said, you know, when you folks came here, he said, it was my people that met you. And he said, let's see, the rest of that story says, you know, he said, the only story that you hear is cowboy and Indians. You don't hear about cowboys and black people. You just hear about cowboys and Indians. So you see, the Indian has his place too.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of good Indians. But just a few kind of spoil it for the rest of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, as we wind down this interview,
Yes.
is there anything that I didn't ask you, or anything else you wanted to talk about, or any closing comments you'd like to make?
I wonder. Right off, I can't think of it.
Okay.
And it's something, I suppose I'm close to through. I just wonder if I've covered everything that to make this satisfactory. You probably have some ideas of your own that would be worth listening to see if I could answer, or things that you might have on your mind that you'd like to have answered, if I can answer them. Someone was here the other day wondering, said, do you, my son fixed up our medals for my wife and I. Said, do you know what all those medals mean? And I said, yes, I do. I can tell you about all of those. I said, you see the red one over there? That's the one that's important. That means that I had 24 years of good conduct in the U.S. Navy. And I said, all the rest of them mean that I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. So that's the way I like to break that down.
Yeah.
Because if you tell them individually, why, by the time they walk off the door, they've forgotten anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll close down the interview, and we'll videotape some of your pictures and such. But I want to thank you for participating in this project.
Well, thank you.
But more importantly, I want to thank you for your service to our country.
Well, thank you so much. You must be a pretty special guy yourself. I'd like to. Okay, now this picture was taken by a photographer in Auckland, New Zealand for Christmas 1942. Real nice guy, and he wanted to take my picture, and I let him take it, and here we are. Okay, and that, of course, is myself and my good wife, Ethel May Berry Reed. She came from Cedarville, Kansas, into the Navy. And she was just in the Navy from November 17th until December 7th before World War II started. And she went to the South Pacific, and on the way down, just as they were arriving, their ship was strafed by two Japanese planes. About 14 people were killed, but none of the Navy nurses were killed. They were taking Navy nurses into Espiritu Santos, just north of Darwin, Australia, to Base Hospital number 3. And from there she went to duty at Brisbane, Australia, and then back to Pearl Harbor, the Naval Hospital there for 6 months, and finally got home then in 1945. And that's where she met my mother, and got us two back together again. I was still out on Okinawa, waiting for the war to end. And then I finally got back the 6th of November 1945, and I was assigned duty at the Naval Hospital at Long Beach, and she was at San Diego, and so we were back and forth real often. And we got married the 22nd day of September 1946.
Does she was she bothered by the fact that the rule that because she was married she had to drop out?
Yeah, in a way she was.
Yeah.
In a way she was. It just because we could have been there together. Now, couples can be together and
Right.
all that stuff. Okay, the top of the ship there is the USS Benevolence. I went aboard that in Auckland, New Zealand in January 1943, and I was on that 2 years and 8 months. That took us over to Perth, Australia, and then from Perth, Australia, all the way to the Philippines and clear to Tokyo Bay. And then the second ship is the battleship USS California. It was hit by a kamikaze right on the equator, and 8 hospital corpsmen were killed on that blow. So 8 of us were transferred over to the California temporarily. We went into Singapore for repairs, and then back to the hospital ship after that. Then the next ship, of course, is dealing with the Korean War, and I was on that 19 months up in Incheon Harbor. That's USS Repose, and the Repose had a wonderful war record in World War II and Korea. And we have a precious book put out by one of our nurses that she spent 7 years designing and publishing, telling about every load that we took and how many patients we treated, and the whole story of that hospital ship. It's a precious, precious story of the whole Korean conflict. Of course, we had the helicopter landing platforms on for the Korean War, so the Marine Corps had a casualty helicopter squadron. They could get casualties in from the 38th parallel to the hospital ship in 40 minutes, and that saved a lot of lives. Okay, so I made Chief Petty Officer, Chief Hospital Foreman on the USS Benevolence. We were at Perth, Australia at that time during 1943, and that was a great promotion for me. That's as high as I ever went in rank and rate, but it meant so much to get that Chief Petty Officer rating, and I held that for a lot of years.